families in Ireland who had no grave to visit, no marker, no certainty. For decades, many were told the same thing. There are no records. There's nothing to find. In Tuam, County Galway, that answer is now being challenged by forensic work happening in real time beneath a housing estate. This video is not a retelling of rumour. It's not a courtroom verdict. It's an attempt to answer 4 questions, carefully and with evidence. What is known? What is still uncertain? Why has accountability been so difficult? And why, after all these years, are new discoveries still emerging?
Some secrets aren't just whispered. Some secrets are buried. In a small town in the west of Ireland, there's a piece of land that held one of those secrets for decades. It's a story about a system, a terrible failure, and a truth that was literally put in the ground.
Tuam is often spoken about as if it is a closed chapter, a tragedy that belongs to the past. But this story is not finished. Modern forensic work, legal challenges, and survivor advocacy are still changing what we know and what can be known. Full forensic excavation work commenced in July 2025 to recover and identify the remains of the nearly 800 infants and children buried there. This process is expected to continue for approximately 24 months, potentially until 2027. Tuam has become a case study for how a modern democratic state tries to reckon with historical wrongs when the victims were infants. The evidence is fragile, and control over records has remained tightly held for decades. Tuam's site did not begin as a place of care. It began life in 1841 as a workhouse, eventually opening in 1846 during the height of the Great Famine. Designed by architect George Wilkinson, it was part of a system built around deterrence, not compassion, an institutional complex intended to impose hardship as policy. Before it became a mother and baby home, the site also functioned as a military barracks and was a location for state executions during the Civil War. This matters because the ground itself was already disturbed, repurposed, and layered with institutional use long before the Bon Secours sisters took over in 1925. After independence in 1922, the Irish state was defining itself morally as well as politically. Sexual behavior, motherhood, and family structure became central to national identity. Pregnancy outside marriage was treated not as a social issue, but as a moral failure, something to be hidden away. Mother and baby homes were not isolated religious spaces. They operated within a wider system where social welfare was delivered through church-run institutions with state funding, oversight, and legal responsibility. Shame became the engine of the system, driving women into institutions, enforcing silence, and limiting choice.
In 20th century Ireland, society was profoundly dominated by the Catholic Church. And in that world, getting pregnant outside of marriage, it was moral failure. The shame didn't just fall on the woman either. It could ruin her entire family's social standing, their reputation, even the chances of her brothers and sisters getting married. These young women, they were forced to leave their homes in total secrecy, hidden away so they wouldn't bring shame on their families. Many were left completely broke, totally destitute. They were trapped, with literally nowhere else to go. And this is where the mother and baby homes come into the picture. Tuam was just one of many all across the country. An official government report would later call them a harsh refuge, a place you went when your own family offered no refuge at all. Who was sent to these places? The system almost always targeted the most marginalized people in society, or women who couldn't support themselves, women and children with disabilities, members of the traveler community, and even victims of sexual assault. Mixed-race children were especially vulnerable and often kept in these institutions for the long term because they were seen as less likely to be adopted.
What was life actually like for the mothers and children inside the Tuam home, and others just like it?
First, the women were forced into unpaid labor, doing punishing work that basically kept the institutions running. Second, they were subjected to coerced adoptions, pressured into giving up their children, signing consent forms they often couldn't even understand. And third, children were used as subjects in unethical vaccine trials from major drug companies, all without any parental knowledge, let alone their consent.
On paper, the homes were there to provide care and shelter, but official reports and survivor testimonies, well, they paint a starkly different picture. The reality was a system defined by severe neglect. Mothers were forced to work, they were often separated from their own children, and they were subjected to this relentless culture of shame and cruelty.
This separation of mother and child, it served another purpose too. It created a ready supply of infants for what was a largely unregulated adoption market. Many children were adopted out, often illegally, often for a fee, to families in Ireland and especially in the United States. For so many mothers, their child just vanished.
This perfect storm for disease. You've got systemic overcrowding, just awful sanitation, a poor diet, constant stream of mothers and babies who are already vulnerable. It paints this horrible picture of neglect, malnutrition, measles, gastroenteritis. It's like a laundry list of poverty and a complete lack of care. A lot of these were conditions that, even back then, were preventable or treatable with the kind of basic medical attention these children just never got.
Not all residents were treated the same. Families who could pay private fees often secured earlier release and better conditions. Money bought dignity. It bought time. It sometimes bought family unity. This difference speaks directly to the question of accountability and who benefited from the system. When women left the homes, they often left with nothing. No wages, no references, no ability to disclose their past without risking further stigma. This made it almost impossible to support a child outside the institution. Separation was not always forced by law, but it was engineered by circumstance.
For the children who managed to survive infancy, life was a constant state of separation. They were called the home babies. It was a label. At school, they were often kept apart from the other children.
A local historian named Catherine Corless. She was just researching the home for a local journal, and she went to the Vital Records office to collect death certificates. But she noticed something odd. She had all these death certificates, but when she tried to find where these children were actually buried, she couldn't. She uncovered a staggering number, 796 death certificates. That's for infants and children who died at the home between 1925 and 1961. That's nearly 800 children with no official burial plot, no headstone, and no public record of where they were laid to rest. 2 children out of 796, which meant that 794 children were, on paper at least, completely unaccounted for. They had simply vanished from the public record of the dead.
Using historical maps, Catherine Corless identified a small burial area on the grounds of the former institution, the same location where children's remains had been uncovered in 1975, within an underground chamber later understood to be part of a former sewage or septic system. Corless did not claim definitive proof of how every child was buried, but the complete absence of burial records, the extremely limited size of the burial area, and the discovery of children's remains within such a structure confronted the public with a question that could no longer be avoided. How could so many children have been buried in such a small place and without record? That question shattered decades of silence, forced a national reckoning, and drew international attention, leading to official investigations that are still ongoing today.
The story really hits the public consciousness in 2014, but it then took 3 years of official inquiry and test excavations before that grim truth was finally officially confirmed.
In 2017, test excavations confirmed the presence of significant quantities of juvenile human remains on the site. The remains were found in an underground structure consistent with a workhouse-era sewage or cesspit system. That finding transformed suspicion into confirmed fact and made inaction impossible. In response to growing public pressure, the Irish government established a commission of investigation into mother and baby homes. Its final report was published in 2021, examining 18 institutions over several decades. While the report confirmed high mortality rates and systemic failure, its reception among survivors was deeply critical. Many rejected its findings, saying their testimony had been misrepresented and that their lived experiences were not accurately reflected in the final conclusions. Survivors and advocacy groups raised serious concerns about fairness and participation. In particular, they objected to the fact that religious orders and state bodies were given access to draft findings and allowed to respond, while survivors themselves were not afforded the same opportunity. These concerns led to legal action. After a legal review, the state acknowledged flaws in the process and reached a settlement in December 2021. This moment was significant. It showed that even the national effort intended to establish truth and accountability was itself contested. For many survivors, the struggle was no longer only about the past, but about who controls the narrative in the present and whose voices are treated as authoritative. Across the mother and baby homes investigated, approximately 9,000 children died. That represents around 15% of all children resident in those institutions. In many cases, mortality rates were significantly higher than national averages. These institutions did not improve children's chances of survival. In many cases, they reduced them.
The report also dug into all these other abuses. There were really credible stories of illegal adoptions, with kids being trafficked, many to the United States. There were suspicions that death certificates were faked to hide these adoptions from the birth mothers. And through it all, there was just this culture of emotional abuse and a complete disregard for basic human rights.
Responsibility was placed at an institutional level. Both the state and the religious orders were found responsible for the conditions that led to these deaths. Despite these findings, no individual or institution was held legally accountable. That absence of accountability remains one of the most difficult and unresolved aspects of this history.
Just how slow and painstaking the road to the truth has been. It starts with Catherine's local research in 2012. By 2014, it's a global news story. The real turning point, though, is 2017, when the test digs proved the stories were true. That leads to this massive 3,000-page official report in 2021. And finally, in 2025, a full forensic exhumation of the site begins. A final, monumental effort to try and identify these children and give them the dignity and death they were so cruelly denied in life.
In December 2025, forensic investigators confirmed evidence of a second burial area at the Tuam site. 11 sets of infant remains were recovered. These children had been buried in coffins. That detail matters because it shows that burial practices were not uniform, even within the same institution and time period.
So who's doing all this work? Well, it's a group called ODATE. That's the Office of the Director of Authorized Intervention in Tuam. This is the official state body that was created specifically to handle this incredibly sensitive, methodical, and really important forensic process.
The current excavation is methodical, forensic, and ongoing. But experts have warned that identification may be limited. Infant remains are fragile. Many are commingled. DNA preservation is uncertain. The goal may ultimately be collective dignity rather than individual certainty. For many survivors and families, the harm did not end with the closure of the homes. It continued through missing records, blocked access, and decades of silence. This has been described as a second wound, not knowing who you are or what happened to your family. The Irish government issued a formal apology, established an €800 million redress scheme alongside medical and counseling supports, and created ODAIT. But some schemes require legal waivers, limiting the ability to pursue further action. Supporters see this as practical compensation. Critics see it as restricting full accountability. This debate is not abstract. It shapes justice in Ireland today. The religious order that ran the Tuam home and the Archbishop of Tuam later issued public apologies, acknowledging their role and the suffering of the mothers and children.
The generation of survivors is getting older. The window for them to find any kind of healing or peace, it's closing.
Families are still left without names, without proper graves, without the simple certainty of what happened to their child, their sibling. What does justice really look like then? It forces all of us to think about what accountability means when it goes beyond official reports and money. And maybe the toughest question of them all is this one. Who gets to decide when the past is finally dealt with? Who gets to say, okay, we're done now? It's a question that's still hanging in the air as the search for truth in Tuam continues, one respectful shovelful of earth at a time.